Tantor Audio, a division of Recorded Books, presents The Erotic Mind, Unlocking the Inner Sources of Passion and Fulfillment by Jack Morin, Ph.D., narrated by Matthew Boston. Introduction. Sex and Self-Discovery. Appreciating the mysteries of Eros requires a new point of view. Ever since the sensation caused by Alfred Kinsey's monumental studies of sexual behavior, we seem to have developed an insatiable appetite for this kind of information. It's not simply that we're voyeuristic or enjoy being titillated and entertained, although most of us do. Many of us also crave reassurance that we're sexually normal, hope to resolve sexual problems, or look for ways to enhance our enjoyment. Others are wondering how to keep the spark of passion alive in long-term relationships or marriages. Never before have so many had so many opportunities to learn so much about sex, and yet the most important aspects of the sexual experience are the ones we know least about and are most reluctant to discuss. For example, we know far more about which sexual acts people engage in, how often and with whom, than we know about what makes some of these acts compelling. We are awash in facts and figures, yet relatively little has been written about what sex means for those involved, such as how it enriches their lives or helps them feel better about themselves. The greatest gap of all exists between our extensive knowledge about the physiology of sex and our relatively rudimentary awareness of the psychology of arousal, how our minds create, intensify, or restrict sexual enthusiasm. Considering how important these issues are for a satisfying sex life, our sketchy understanding here is nothing short of tragic. Sex therapist Bernie Zilbergeld puts it bluntly. More than anything else, arousal is what drives good sex. It is the spark. It is also the cornerstone of a sexuality based on pleasure rather than on performance. If you want more exciting and more satisfying sex, go for greater arousal. Almost everyone is aware that becoming aroused feels good. But how can we create greater arousal when we know so little about it? Why are certain people, images, and situations so much more stimulating than others? Why do individual preferences and patterns vary so dramatically? Why are most of us attached to specific turn-ons? And what do our turn-ons reveal about who we are and what we're searching for? These and other unanswered questions about arousal lie at the heart of this book. To further our understanding, we must broaden our interest beyond mere sex and explore the world of eroticism. The erotic landscape is vastly larger, richer, and more intricate than the physiology of sex or any repertoire of sexual techniques. The more mechanical and explicit aspects of sex are relatively easy to observe and translate into numbers and graphs, whereas the most rewarding and powerful secrets of eroticism are elusive, highly individualistic, and difficult to quantify. To make sense of it, we must cultivate a whole new way of perceiving. What is eroticism? The modern concept of eroticism is rooted in Greek mythology. Eros was the young and playful god of love, son of Aphrodite, the goddess of love and beauty. At the most basic level, Eros is the source of attraction and the craving for sexual love. Some Greek philosophers also saw Eros as the force behind all creation, his absence leading to decay and destruction. Sigmund Freud was drawn to this interpretation, associating Eros, which he conceived as energy rather than a god, with his concept of libido, a combination of sexual drive and life force. Eroticism can best be understood as the multifaceted process through which our innate capacity for arousal is shaped, focused, suppressed, and expressed. We're born both sensuous and sexual, but we become erotic as we receive both overt and subtle messages about ourselves from our primary caretakers, and gradually integrate these messages with our experiences of touch, as well as the highly personal mental images and emotions that go with them. As we grow, The demands and ideals of our culture, along with the interpersonal dynamics of our families and communities, influence our responses profoundly. Eroticism is the process through which sex becomes meaningful. By the time we reach adulthood, we've all discovered that, by itself, sex can be little more than a collection of urges and acts. But the erotic is intricately connected with our hopes, expectations, struggles, and anxieties, everything that makes us human. Whereas sex can be simple, by its very nature, eroticism is complex, and from this richness, true passions are born. It is also through the magic of Eros that sex and our search for emotional closeness become intertwined. Sexologist David Snarsh defines eroticism as the pursuit and delight in sexual pleasure. This beautifully idealistic definition certainly describes those notable moments when we are able to express and celebrate our erotic selves without restraint. But it leaves out the fact that Eros is energized by the entire human drama, including the unruly impulses and painful lessons that no one, except those who retreat from life, can possibly avoid. No wonder the erotic mind conjures up images of debauchery as well as delight, because it is connected with all aspects of existence. I define eroticism as the interplay of sexual arousal with the challenges of living and loving. A paradoxical point of view. Your ability to probe the mysteries of the erotic mind insightfully and to benefit from your discoveries will be enhanced enormously if you consciously cultivate a stance toward the erotic that allows you to appreciate fully its rich complexity. The two predominant schools of thought in contemporary psychology, which I call the pathological and the neat and clean, have unwittingly limited our understanding of eroticism at least as much as they have advanced it. These two viewpoints extend way beyond psychology, permeating modern attitudes in countless ways. Emphasizing pathology. The pathology perspective is by far the older and more deeply entrenched. Freud and his psychoanalytic followers have always been the most articulate proponents of this perspective. From its inception, psychoanalysis has been very interested in eroticism, largely as a result of Freud's two great contributions to the study of sex. One, making us aware of the profound influence the unconscious has in shaping personality and therefore eroticism. And two, forcing us to recognize that children are sexual beings, although not, of course, in the same way as adults. Freud rightly insisted that sexuality and personality unfold in tandem, with much of that process occurring outside conscious awareness. Whereas psychoanalysts have done us all a service by recognizing and investigating the untamed powers of Eros, most make their observations through a dark lens. To a far greater degree than today's theorists of pathology are aware, the pathology model of sex is rooted in the concept of sex as sin. Almost like a fire and brimstone preacher, Freud himself believed that, if left unchecked, erotic urges would wreak havoc. The psychological word for sin is perversion, and in some circles it's shockingly easy to qualify for that label. Those who are attracted to the wrong people, who eroticize inanimate objects, who have the wrong kinds of orgasms, or who express infantile preferences, such as strong interests in masturbation, oral or anal stimulation, have, at one time or another, all been stigmatized by the pathology approach to sex. Pathology-oriented psychologies typically propose such a narrow path for normal erotic development that hardly anyone ever attains it. Notions of erotic health are often little more than abstractions, derived almost entirely from theory and from therapeutic work with those who are sexually troubled. While a great deal can be understood through theory and therapy, unless we also study eroticism in its most positive forms, many of our conclusions are bound to be distorted. Sanitizing Eros. The neat and clean perspective is a more recent development, based primarily on the precepts of behaviorism and humanism. Behaviorists see human sexuality as governed by predictable rules of learning. They are convinced that the unruly tendencies of Eros can be controlled by a little tinkering with rewards and punishments. Humanistic psychologists, fed up with the traditional focus on pathology, emphasize human potential and our capacity for growth. This approach allows people much more freedom to be human and thus diverse. But the humanists have shockingly little to say about sex, and even less about eroticism. They prefer to talk about love and intimacy, worthy topics to be sure, but made strangely one-sided by ignoring our lustier impulses. I'm humanistically oriented myself, and have always been perplexed about how eroticism became the neglected stepchild of humanistic psychology. Could it be that it's just too messy? Masters and Johnson launched the field of modern sex therapy in 1970. They started with the traditional medical model with an emphasis on psychological function and dysfunction. Then, from humanism, they incorporated an acceptance of sexual variations and an optimistic belief that people gravitate toward health. Using principles of behaviorism, they developed practical, step-by-step methods for facilitating change. This mixture proved to be far more effective than traditional approaches in helping people resolve problems with their sexual functioning. Like all new fields, modern sex therapy has limitations, one of which is the fact that it is firmly rooted in the neat and clean perspective. Masters and Johnson considered sex to be fundamentally simple, a natural function. According to this view, all that is required for a happy sex life is the removal of disruptive impediments, most notably anxiety and guilt. If it ever occurred to them that the same impediments they sought to eliminate might also be turn-ons, they neglected to mention it. Many of today's sex therapists are still so preoccupied with getting rid of inhibitions that they rarely stop to wonder how sexual passion is actually created and intensified. They assume, for example, that uncomplicated, comfortable sex is the best kind, which, of course, isn't necessarily so. Neat and clean practitioners also believe that the ability to become aroused and to have orgasms should be sufficient for satisfaction. They don't dwell on the fact that eroticism is intertwined with the untidy struggles of being human and is therefore inherently complex and unpredictable. Embracing paradox. This book is based on a completely different point of view. Whereas the pathology perspective fails to appreciate the inevitable variability of eroticism, and the neat and clean perspective tries to downplay its irrational power, the paradoxical perspective recognizes the joys of Eros without denying its intricacies and risks. This new paradigm acknowledges and embraces the contradictory, dual-edged nature of erotic life. It recognizes that anything that inhibits arousal, including anxiety or guilt, can, under different circumstances, amplify it. Consequently, we must view with considerable skepticism any absolute statements about what makes sex either exciting or problematic. Many find it discomforting to tolerate the ambiguity of the erotic experience, to accept its mixed motivations, or to observe how the erotic mind has a habit of transforming one idea or emotion into another. And yet, if we fail to come to terms with the fundamentally paradoxical nature of eroticism, we set the stage for its negative aspects to appear more frighteningly destructive. At the same time, the positive aspects of erotic life become increasingly elusive and difficult to celebrate, almost as if they are canceled out by a recognition of the danger or uncertainty inherent in them. The paradoxical perspective is the best alternative to the exaggerated shifts in sexual attitudes we've seen during the last few decades. According to the ethos of the 1960s and 1970s, sexual experimentation and freedom were valued. For millions, it was a time to throw off old restraints, to push boundaries, and sometimes to overindulge recklessly. Within a single decade, the pendulum lurched back in the opposite direction. In response to fear of AIDS and other sexually transmitted diseases, as well as the atmosphere of conservative politics, social attitudes about sex flipped from celebration to dread. Reflecting and abetting this radical shift, the popular media turns its attention to the most disturbing manifestations of the erotic impulse, including sexual abuse and harassment, teen pregnancies, disease, and even satanic cults. In record time, the popular perception of sex went from good to bad. No wonder so many of us are confused and a bit dazed. We live in an era of both promise and great danger. The danger is that negativity will drive eroticism into the shadows, where it is most likely to assume the very shapes we fear. But those who find the courage to survey the entire panoply of the erotic experience, joyful as well as dangerous, life-giving as well as troublesome, stand on the brink of a new consciousness of Eros. As our perspective enlarges, we can see that, in the final analysis, eroticism can never be either pathological or neat and clean, for it is as vast and multifaceted as human nature itself. The paradoxical perspective is the only point of view large enough to encompass this truth. What this book can do for you. The Erotic Mind is an invitation to a deeper understanding and appreciation of the role of eroticism in your life. The book is divided into 3 parts. Part 1, Realms of Passion, focuses primarily on peak erotic experiences as rich sources of information about the inner workings of the erotic mind. Particularly memorable real-life encounters, as well as compelling fantasies, offer us glimpses of eroticism thriving, as opposed to malfunctioning or causing trouble. In addition, during moments of peak arousal, the dynamics of eroticism are accentuated and thus easier to observe. I first realized the value of peak sexual experiences in my work as a therapist. Years later, I created the Sexual Excitement Survey, so that respondents could write anonymously and in considerable detail about their most unforgettable turn-ons. Their sexy tales will serve as fascinating illustrations of the erotic mind in action. If you read this book solely as an interested observer, I'm sure you'll be informed and entertained, but I hope you'll use it to embark on a voyage of erotic self-exploration. I will regularly invite you to examine your own peak erotic experiences and show you how to search gently for clues to your eroticism. You'll open new pathways to sexual satisfaction by reading about other people's erotic truths, the ones that rarely are given a voice, while simultaneously attending to your own. You'll identify the factors that make peak experiences stand out and discover that eroticism is dynamic and paradoxical because it springs from the interplay between your attractions and the obstacles that stand in your way. It would become clear that predictable challenges of early life, faced by all of us, become the cornerstones of eroticism. You already know how positive emotions can energize arousal, but you'll see how unexpected aphrodisiacs such as anxiety, guilt, and anger can have similar effects. As your awareness expands, you'll marvel at your erotic mind's amazing ability to transform life's inevitable difficulties and emotional wounds into sources of excitation. In Part 2, Troublesome Turn-Ons, we'll use the paradoxical perspective to gain insight into extremely common but rarely discussed erotic problems. We'll look at how the same emotions that excite us can turn against us, blocking our enjoyment. We'll also explore how ingrained erotic patterns can unconsciously draw us into relationships as frustrating as they are intense. Then we'll discover how erotic conflicts during childhood and adolescence can split our lustful from our tender feelings. And we'll observe how low self-esteem sometimes links with high arousal to produce the most overwhelming and destructive of all turn-ons. As you study these difficulties, they will become understandable rather than frightening. Part 2 concludes with a practical look at the erotic mind as a potent force for healing and growth, including a 7-step program that anyone can follow to promote positive erotic changes. In Part 3, Positively Erotic, we'll explore how your growing self-awareness can guide you toward more joy and satisfaction in your life. The paradoxical perspective will provide you with new insights into the age-old challenge of deepening intimacy while sustaining passion in long-term relationships. While acknowledging the inherent conflict between closeness and sexual excitement, you'll learn how erotic couples actively cultivate key skills to keep the spark alive between them as their relationships grow. Next, we'll reevaluate the true nature of erotic health. Crucial signposts will help you evaluate your sexual well-being and prepare you for lifelong erotic development. The book concludes with an inspiring look at the rewards of the erotic adventure. A word about AIDS and safe sex. It's difficult to imagine anyone who's unaware of the international scourge of AIDS. All of us, regardless of gender or sexual orientation, must evaluate our sexual behavior to minimize the risk of exposure to HIV, the virus that causes AIDS. There's disagreement about the odds, seemingly quite low, of contracting HIV through activities such as tongue kissing or oral sex without ejaculation. But the centerpiece of any safe sex policy is the decision never to engage in vaginal or anal intercourse without using a latex condom, or to abstain altogether. The only sexually active people who needn't be concerned are couples who have been monogamous for at least 6 months and have both recently tested negative for the antibodies to HIV, indicating that they've never been exposed. As long as these couples can trust each other to avoid unsafe sex outside the relationship, HIV isn't an issue. Keep in mind that AIDS prevention is not covered in this book. You'll notice stories of peak sex involving intercourse in non-monogamous situations that don't mention condoms. Of course, some of these encounters occurred before the AIDS epidemic. Other people may have used condoms, but didn't say so, because it was merely a practical consideration, like birth control, that, although important, didn't play a role in making their encounters memorable. Some people undoubtedly took unwise risks. Fantasies, of course, are totally exempt from all practical considerations. If you have questions about AIDS and how to prevent it, ask your local health department, an organization concerned with AIDS, or your physician. Attitudes for self-discovery. Having had the privilege of guiding hundreds of men and women on voyages of erotic self-discovery, I've consistently observed that venturing into the erotic realm is dramatically more rewarding for those who, right from the start, make a point of learning how to 1. Suspend judgments, 2. Trust themselves, and 3. Use a gentle approach. Suspending judgments. My most fervent belief about erotic self-discovery is that deep erotic truths do not reveal themselves to judgmental eyes and non-accepting hearts. The secrets of the erotic mind become visible only to those who consciously cultivate the ability to set aside critical evaluations long enough to perceive what's actually there. Until you learn this all-important skill, your perceptions will be skewed and their usefulness dramatically reduced. The most emotionally charged judgments arise from moral convictions. Not surprisingly, those who believe in immutable moral doctrines usually have the most difficulty setting aside their automatic inclinations to reject or criticize actions and thoughts that violate their concepts of right and wrong. But not all judgments are rooted in morality. Many people experience a similar visceral discomfort when their erotic experiences don't match their expectations, or when they realize that what truly excites them conflicts with their ideals. The only way to learn consciously to suspend judgments is through practice in a non-threatening environment. Just like children, when we fear being judged or ridiculed by ourselves or others, we become immobilized or take refuge in rigid beliefs and habits. But any observer who suspends judgment, even for a moment, immediately becomes more open-minded and relaxed. How can you develop this skill? The first step is to begin acknowledging what triggers your critical responses. Then you must decide whether to repeat those responses or to try setting them aside. All that matters now is that you become aware of when you're making judgments, especially if they occur automatically and are therefore invisible. Some people have a mistaken notion that suspending judgments means adopting an amoral stance towards sexuality or negating the importance of one's values. Nothing could be further from the truth. In fact, Only through a courageous examination of the difficult truths of erotic life does it become possible to establish a meaningful ethical system to guide our actions. Trusting yourself. Few of us have been taught that we can be trusted in the erotic realm. Quite the opposite. As youngsters, most of us were encouraged by a variety of subliminal and explicit messages to be wary of our eroticism as it was developing. Understandably, adults who have learned these lessons well often feel squeamish about examining the content and meaning of their turn-ons. It's not surprising or unusual to harbor a semi-conscious concern that you might uncover things about yourself that you would be better off not knowing. You can imagine how such an attitude restricts your vision. But if your childhood training has made you uneasy about eroticism, denying that attitude will only make matters worse. The best thing you can do is to acknowledge your feelings, no matter how illogical it may seem, and avoid putting yourself down for them. Discomfort with one's sexuality takes years to build up and can't be changed overnight. Your journey of erotic self-discovery will be infinitely easier and more rewarding if you can find and nurture even a small spark of faith in yourself. As you come to realize that Eros is fueled by the energy of life itself, and thus contains a deep-rooted urge toward growth and self-affirmation, the legacy of mistrust can be gradually overcome. Keep in mind that those who establish a comfortable acceptance of their erotic urges are the least likely to inflict harm upon themselves or others. Using a gentle approach. Although many have tried to command the inner secrets of their erotic life to reveal themselves, no one has succeeded. Your erotic mind, fearing condemnation or rejection, has become adept at concealing itself, because few of us are free to express our unfolding eroticism openly. Hiding the truth, even from yourself, begins as an act of primitive self-preservation. To uncover what has long been hidden, be patient and gentle. Allow the erotic mind to reveal itself at its own pace as it tests the waters. Practice offering yourself invitations to see more, to comprehend more, to accept more, to enjoy more. Each invitation carries with it the freedom to decline or to wait. The goal of erotic self-understanding is furthered by a willingness to ease up in the face of your own reluctance. These three attitudes taken together, suspending judgments, trusting yourself, and using a gentle approach, help bring you face to face with Eros in action without being afraid. Armed with an appreciation of paradox, a willingness to venture boldly into uncharted territory, and a sense of awe and wonder, you are ready to uncap the wellspring of passion. And what a fulfillment! You will discover that passion and fulfillment are intricately linked, yet distinct experiences. Just as surely as passion strives for fulfillment, fulfillment longs for passion. Between the two, Eros flourishes. Part 1. Realms of Passion. 1. Peak erotic experiences. Unforgettable turn-ons are windows into your erotic mind. One of the most effective and enjoyable ways to unlock the mysteries of the Eros is to reminisce about your most compelling turn-ons. During these moments of high arousal, the crucial elements, your partner, the setting, perhaps a tantalizing twist of luck, all mesh like instruments of an orchestra, producing a crescendo of passion. Look closely at a peak turn-on, and you'll undoubtedly sense that something close to the core of your being has been touched. And because everything is accentuated during such moments, they reveal an enormous amount about how your eroticism works. As a young psychology student in the 1960s, I was influenced by Abraham Maslow, who called for a psychology of health to counterbalance the overemphasis on problems that he believed was distorting our view of human beings. He broke new ground by studying people he called self-actualizers, those who are comfortable with themselves, relatively free of neurotic conflicts from the past, and available to tackle the challenges of living with creativity and zest. Self-actualizers are still largely ignored by psychologists, even though they have much to teach us about emotional well-being. Maslow was equally intrigued by a wide variety of peak experiences.
Sample complete. Ready to continue?